The beauty of our funds is they're all evergreen, which means an investor can come into our funds and they can be in that fund for 10, 20 years, right, as long as they want to, which is very difficult to do in other funds and especially of alternative assets.
So impact is a big part of what, for me, I know for a lot of our clients, and why we've chosen to invest. Personally, I've invested with DLP Capital, my family, and a lot of my clients. For the impact you guys are making, it's beyond just numbers, right? It's both. And talking about ending and helping to end the housing crisis, right? And it's a big goal and it's a big aspiration, but here's what I'm seeing, Rich. I'm curious what you think about it. And this is known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. It's happening. And according to Marcus and Millichap, John Chang, head of research, about $84 trillion is set to pass in the next 20 years. This is known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. And this is tied mostly commercial real estate, high-end primary homes, and businesses, of which 50% of that wealth across America are those three assets as well. These are illiquid assets that a lot of people want to make an impact, want to make a difference, but feel trapped by the capital gains tax, trapped by the estate tax. But just talk about even just a percent or 10% of that $84 trillion being able to be unlocked and invested into Buildings Community Fund, the housing fund, right? The lending fund, and the difference in the impact that could make for DLP, for investors, and for the housing crisis.
Certainly. And there's two different components of that. I mean, I'd love to come back and talk a little about impact in a different way, the impact we're making in communities and again, over the housing crisis. But if you think about just the impact we're making from an investment standpoint, right? The beauty of our funds is they're all evergreen, which means an investor can come into our funds and they can be in that fund for 10, 20 years, right, as long as they want to, which is very difficult to do in other funds and especially of alternative assets. So that's a great aspect of the way we structure this because, again, take your 10% that you mentioned. It's easy to double that 10% in 5 to 6 years, right, which means you can quadruple it in 10 to 12 years, right? And now you're talking great generation of wealth. And again, how do you preserve it? We always say consult your accountants, your advisors, your attorneys, right, in terms of how to structure things. But that's amazing wealth that you could generate within our funds.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here, the concept of tax flow and cash flow and generational wealth impact and having all of these three converge. And, I also believe that this is like the time as this, like we're created for a time like this. And my thought is it's the reverse Tea Party, Rich, right? If you remember, before we were a nation, those that were fighting against the British rule were saying, look, this is too much tax for not a lot of representation. Now we've gone on and our nation is, 200 plus years old, and we've amassed what might be the biggest and the largest wealth, amount of wealth in the history of the planet. And so the impact that it can have, or we fumble. And the fumble can be, no matter what side you vote for, the government not being very efficient with solving the multifamily housing crisis or housing crisis in general, and or just not being very efficient with the tax dollars, right? So to keep it in the hands of the people and to be able to invest and make an impact for communities, I think is tremendous, right?